Did you know your gut bacteria are already shaping how long you'll live? By 50, they split onto two paths, one toward longer life, one toward the opposite. A 2021 study tracked over 9,000 people to find out which path you're on. I'm Sophia Hart. My work is simple. I live inside the research most people never see, and I pull out the parts that actually change what's happening in your body after 40. So let me describe a stretch of years you might recognize. You didn't get lazy. You didn't stop caring. If anything, you got more careful. Smaller portions, more vegetables on the plate, a walk most evenings, an honest effort to get to bed on time. And your body answered with a kind of quiet betrayal. The weight started settling in places it never used to, around the middle, stubborn and new. The afternoon energy crash showed up right on schedule. Your stomach began keeping its own opinions, bloated some days, sluggish the next, for no reason you could point to. And recovery, from a hard workout or one bad night of sleep, stopped taking hours and started taking days. You went in, got the standard blood panel, and were told it was just age, maybe eat a little less, move a little more. Useful advice, if your body were still the one you had at 25. It isn't. Here's what I need you to hear before anything else. This is not your fault. Your body is not broken, and it is not failing you out of spite. It is running a program written long before you were born, and somewhere in your late 40s, one of the quietest and most powerful systems in that program begins to change in a way almost no one explains to you. That system isn't your thyroid, it isn't your metabolism, and it certainly isn't your willpower. It's the vast community of living organisms packed into your gut, what scientists call the microbiome. You are carrying trillions of them, and by recent counts, those microbial cells roughly rival the number of your own, nearly 1 for 1. So picture it less as a single organ and more as a rainforest you happen to host. Thousands of species, each with a role, all of them in constant conversation with the rest of you, every minute of every day. And this is the part that should stop you in your tracks. That inner wilderness doesn't just break down lunch. It helps train your defenses against disease. It can soothe or inflame the fires burning low inside your tissues. And it even shapes how your body reads the food you eat and the hunger you feel. When researchers at the Institute for Systems Biology examined how this ecosystem shifts across a lifetime, they found a single signature hiding in the gut that predicted, with quiet and unsettling accuracy, who would still be alive years later and who would not. Not cholesterol, not blood pressure, the makeup of your gut. So stick with me, because a few minutes from now, I'll show you the exact shift this ecosystem makes in the people who reach their 90s sharp, mobile, and independent, and why that shift starts taking shape right around the age you are today. And a little later, something stranger. The appetite break your own gut microbes build for you, the one that weakens as the years pass, and why it runs on the very same biology as the most talked about weight loss medication on the planet. You have felt this change already. You simply didn't have a name for it. By the time we're done, you will, and you'll finally understand why the body you trusted at 35 is playing by rules that no longer apply. Here's where almost everyone guesses wrong. Ask most people what a healthy gut looks like in old age, and they picture a tidy, balanced lineup of all the good organisms, the same wholesome roster everyone's supposed to carry. The evidence points the other way. When those same Seattle researchers mapped these inner ecosystems across thousands of lives, the people aging best were not the ones clinging to the standard off-the-rack community everyone hosts in their 20s. They were the ones whose gut had quietly become one of a kind. Picture a fingerprint that grows sharper with time. Early on, your inner ecosystem looks a lot like your neighbors, the same common families running the show, one in particular, called Bacteroides, seated at the head of the table. But in the people who reach their 80s and beyond, still sharp, still mobile, still themselves, that crowd-pleasing default slowly thins, and something far more personal moves in. The ones whose gut refused to budge, who kept that generic, everybody's the same makeup deep into later life, did worse, measurably. Across a 4-year stretch following older men between 78 and 98, the ones frozen on the common template were the ones less likely to still be there at the finish. Not because of what they ate that week, because of who was living inside them. And this is not just a line on the chart. As the gut turns more individual, it begins brewing a different set of chemicals into your blood. One of them starts as tryptophan, yes, the amino acid everyone blames for the couch coma after Thanksgiving dinner. Your residents spin it into a compound called indole, and in animal research, that very compound stretches lifespan and keeps the body younger, longer. Another marker that climbs alongside this shift shows up at strikingly high levels in the blood of people who live past 100. So the gut that ages well isn't sitting still, staying balanced. It's transforming, manufacturing rarer and rarer ingredients that the longest lived among us seem to share. Now turn that toward what you may be feeling right now. If your inner ecosystem is stuck on the young, generic setting while the calendar keeps moving, you get the exact experience we opened with, the heavy middle. The digestion with a mind of its own, the recovery that drags, the quiet sense that your body stopped returning your calls. That is not a sentence you're required to serve. It's a community that was never given a reason to grow up. And remember the appetite break I promised you? The one your own gut builds, then slowly lets slip? It runs on a byproduct these vanishing residents are supposed to make. As they fade, the signal fades with them. We will get to exactly how that machinery works, and why it rhymes with the most famous shot in the country right now. But first, a question that should nag at you. If this drift toward a one-of-a-kind gut is so good for you, why does it stall for so many people right in the middle of life? Something ordinary, something likely on your plate this week, is leaning on the pause button for the whole process. It isn't sugar, it isn't fat, and once you can see it, you will never unsee it. That is exactly where we're going next. So what's quietly holding the pause button down? Here's the twist almost no one sees coming. It isn't sugar, and it isn't fat. It's a category of ingredients engineered into modern food for reasons that have nothing to do with nourishment, smoothness, shelf life, the way a sauce clings to a noodle instead of separating in the jar. Your gut community never met these molecules across millions of years of evolution. Now it meets them 3 times a day. Start with the texture agents, the ones that keep ice cream creamy and bottled dressing from splitting. Scientists call them emulsifiers. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania ran a double-blind, carefully controlled feeding trial, published in 2022, on just one of them, a common thickener called carboxymethylcellulose. Healthy adults ate 15 grams of it a day for 11 days. That was the whole intervention, 11 days. The findings were quiet but pointed. The variety of organisms inside them shrank, and in some of them something more unsettling. The bacteria began pressing in where they're never meant to go. To see why that matters, picture the lining of your gut as a guarded border. Normally, a slit coat of mucus paints that wall, a buffer zone that holds the bustling crowd of residents at a polite distance from your own tissue. The texture agents thin that buffer. The crowd creeps in close, your defenses notice strangers pressed against the fence, and they do exactly what they evolved to do, light a small, steady fire. Not the roaring kind you feel, the slow, smoldering kind you don't. There's a name for that low, chronic burn as it spreads through an aging body. Researchers call it inflammaging, and it's one of the engines they increasingly tie to how fast the rest of you wears down. Joints, arteries, brain, all of it. Now the part that may sting a little. You've done this, haven't you? Reached for the zero-sugar version of your soda and told yourself you were being good to your body? A team at the Weizmann Institute put that instinct on trial. 120 healthy adults, 4 different no-calorie sweeteners, 2 weeks each. Every dose kept below the officially accepted limit. Published the same year in one of the most demanding journals in the field, 2 of the 4, saccharin and sucralose, among the most common sugar substitutes on the shelf, measurably worsened the volunteers' blood sugar control. And here's the proof it wasn't chance. When the scientists lifted the gut residents out of those volunteers and placed them into mice raised with no microbes at all, the mice inherited the very same blood sugar trouble. The sweetener wasn't acting on the body directly. It was acting by rewriting who lived in the gut. Quick aside before we go deeper. If this is rearranging how you think about your own body, the single most useful thing you can do is subscribe, so the next breakdown actually reaches you instead of dissolving into the feed. That's the entire ask. So your inner ecosystem has been losing ground from 2 sides at once, worn thin at the border, and quietly reprogrammed by things sold to you as harmless. Which brings us, at last, to the promise I made in the first 30 seconds. The appetite switch your own residents build for you, the one that powers down as they fade, and why it runs on the exact same machinery that the most famous injection in America rents out by the dose. Once you see how your body manufactures its own version of that drug, two mysteries crack open together: why the shots work so well, and why the weight comes roaring back the moment people stop. And right after that, the part you can actually use. What the evidence says coaxes this ecosystem back toward its younger, faster, longer living habits. No prescription required. Here's the promise I've been holding since the first 30 seconds. Your body already builds its own appetite brake, and it builds it down in the gut. When you feed your residents the kind of fiber they can ferment, they pay you back in tiny molecules called short-chain fatty acids. Those molecules drift over to a row of specialized sensor cells studded along your gut wall, the L cells, and switch them on. The L cells answer by releasing a hormone with an unglamorous name and an outsized job: glucagon-like peptide 1, GLP-1. It travels up to your brain and delivers one message: you're full, you can stop now. It slows how fast your stomach empties, and it steadies the blood sugar that drives the next craving. A 2023 review in a leading pathology journal traced the chain cleanly. Feed the bacteria, they make the byproduct. The byproduct trips the switch, the fullness signal fires. That is the break. And now you can finally see what's been happening to you. As the residents who manufacture that byproduct thin out, worn down by the years, starved of fiber, harassed by the additives we covered a moment ago, the signal they used to throw gets weaker. The break goes spongy. The same plate that once flipped your fullness switch by the end of dinner now barely grazes it. You eat, and 20 minutes later your body still hasn't gotten the message. That is not greed. That is a broken messenger. Which brings us to the most famous injection in America. Semaglutide, sold as Ozempic for type 2 diabetes, and Wegovy for weight loss, is, at its core, a manufactured copy of that exact hormone. It walks up to the very same receptors your gut used to trigger on its own and presses them, hard, at a force your thinning residents could never reach. Its newer cousin, tirzepatide, branded Mounjaro and Zepbound, leans on a second receptor as well. The shots don't invent a new trick. They borrow the one your own body was already running, and they crank the volume. So they work because they're speaking your native language. And here is why the weight so often comes roaring back. In the trial that put these drugs on the map, nearly 2,000 adults, followed for more than a year, researchers tracked what happened after people stopped. Within 12 months of the final dose, the average person had regained 2/3 of everything they'd lost. Published in 2022. Read that the way the scientists meant it. The rebound was never weak character. The drug had been renting the fullness signal by the week. It never rebuilt the rundown factory that was supposed to produce that signal for free. Pull the rental, and you're handed back the same spongy break you started with. One more thing the research is honest about. When weight comes off this fast, not all of it is fat. In a body scan analysis from that same landmark trial, lean body mass, the tissue that includes your muscle, slipped by roughly 1/10, even though fat fell faster. For someone already past 45, quietly surrendering muscle to time, that's worth knowing. Muscle is hard to win back and easy to lose. None of this is a verdict on the medication. These are simply the trade-offs the evidence lays out, and the long-range picture is still being written. So if the shot only rents the signal, the real question is whether you can rebuild the factory yourself, bring back the residents who fled, restart your own production line. The research says you can, faster than you'd guess, and it doesn't run through a pharmacy. That is exactly where we're going next. So here's the part you've earned. The factory isn't gone. It's understaffed, and the research says you can hire the workforce back, often in a matter of weeks, with nothing stronger than what's already in the grocery store. Think of it less like swallowing a fix and more like replanting a garden that quietly went to seed. Start with the lever that surprised the scientists by how plainly it showed up. The largest crowdsourced gut study ever run, out of the University of California, San Diego, more than 15,000 samples, published in 2018, went hunting for what separated the richest, most resilient inner ecosystems from the threadbare ones. It wasn't whether people called themselves vegetarian or carnivore or anything in between. The single strongest signal was a humble count: how many different plants they ate in a week. The folks eating more than 30 distinct plant types carried visibly more varied communities inside them, and, as a bonus, fewer of the bacterial genes that shrug off antibiotics than the people stuck at 10 or fewer. And the reason is almost mechanical. Different plants carry different kinds of fiber, and different residents specialize in breaking down different ones. Feed only a handful of plants, and only a handful of species get fed. Spread the table wider, and more of them show up to eat. So the target isn't a cleanse or a rule book, it's a number. 30 across a whole week, and herbs, spices, nuts, seeds, beans, and whole grains each count as one. A sprinkle of oregano is a plant. So is a tablespoon of pumpkin seeds. Now the twist nobody saw coming. A team at Stanford put 2 eating patterns head-to-head for 10 weeks, 36 adults, published in 2021. One group piled on plant fiber. The other leaned into fermented foods: yogurt, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, brine-soaked vegetables, kombucha. You'd bet on the fiber. Instead, the fiber group's variety barely budged in that window. But the fermented food group's inner diversity climbed, and in their blood, 19 separate markers of inflammation fell, including one, interleukin-6, tied to the very slow burn wear and tear we connected earlier to how fast a body ages. More servings, bigger effect. Read those 2 results side by side, because together they finish the story from a moment ago. The fibrous plants are food for the residents you already have, the raw material they ferment into that appetite break fuel your own gut is supposed to make. The fermented foods seem to help recruit brand new residents into the neighborhood. One feeds the workforce, the other rehires it. They aren't rivals, they're 2 halves of the same repair. There's a third move, and it's subtraction. Easing off the additive-dense, heavily processed stuff, the texture smoothers and the no-sugar swaps we took apart earlier, gives that thinned protective lining a chance to knit back together, and the new arrivals a chance to settle in. There's little sense rebuilding the boat while you're still drilling holes in the hull. And one honest caveat, because you'll be tempted. In both of these trials, the wins came from food, not from a capsule. The evidence for swallowing a pill version is far shakier, and it swings wildly from one product to the next. The plate is doing the work here, not the supplement aisle. How fast? The fermented food shifts surfaced inside 10 weeks. Weeks, not years. But no 2 of these inner worlds respond quite alike, so your timeline is your own. Which leaves one last move, the single thing that decides whether all of this holds or quietly slides back. And it carries us right back to the 2 paths we opened with. Cast your mind all the way back to the very first thing I told you. 2 paths. One gut drifting year by year toward something richer and more its own. The other frozen on the same generic blueprint everyone carries at 25. And in that study of more than 9,000 people, it was the frozen one, the gut that never changed, that quietly tracked with leaving this life sooner. Here's the move I promised would matter more than any single food. You don't pick your path once. You pick it at nearly every meal, across years, because the ecosystem inside you is a mirror. Week after week, it becomes a reflection of exactly what you hand it. Feed it variety and life, and it drifts toward the resilient, one-of-a-kind state that travels with the people who reach old age still themselves. Feed it the same narrow, stripped-down fare on repeat, and it slides back to the crowd-pleasing average, the path that doesn't end well. That is the whole reason the weight came roaring back when people stopped the shot. The injection rented a signal. It never changed what was being fed. A mirror only ever shows what's standing in front of it. So this was never really about a flatter stomach, though that may follow. It's about which trajectory your whole body rides into your 60s, your 70s, your 80s. Whether the low fire we talked about smolders for decades or settles down. Whether your own fullness signal keeps its voice or fades to a whisper. Whether your defenses stay sharp or wear thin. The community in your gut has a hand in every one of those, and it has been waiting this entire time for a reason to grow up. And I want to be precise about something, because you may have spent years quietly blaming yourself. You were never lazy. You were never weak. You were outnumbered, running a program written long before you were born, inside a food world engineered to exploit it. None of that was a character flaw. It was a blind spot. The one thing that ever truly shifted your odds was information, and you're holding it now. The program turns out to be editable. You just needed to see the code. 2 quick things before you go. If you'd rather understand your own body than be handed one more list of rules to feel guilty about, subscribe. That's the whole reason this channel exists, to put the research in your hands and let you decide what to do with it. And leave a comment telling me which system inside you to take apart next. Your hormones, your sleep, the slow architecture of your heart. I read every one, and they're what decide where I dig. Because here's what's different now. You're no longer waiting to find out which of the 2 paths you're on. Starting with your very next meal, you're the one choosing it.